All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Um, Welcome to our Civil Rights Conference. My name is Joy Murphy. I am the Director of Learning and Engagement at the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum. This conference is a commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas Landmark Civil Rights Conference, and is a partnership between the Brown v. Board National Historic Park, the Central High School National Historic Site, the William J. Clinton Presidential Library and Museum, the Dwight D. Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum, the United States Commission on Civil Rights, and StoryCorp. We're also pleased to welcome our conference sponsors, Humanities Kansas, the Eisenhower Foundation, and the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. Throughout this week-long conference, we will take an in-depth look at the Brown decision, its impact and its legacy, as well as a larger look at civil rights. You will hear stories of desegregation from those that lived it. It is our sincere hope that you leave this conference with a greater appreciation for the experiences of these pioneers and a better understanding of civil rights. A few housekeeping notes. Everyone received a link to the Eisenhower Library YouTube channel and the specific playlist where these events will stream. Each event has its own separate stream. Therefore, you will have to click on each program to watch it. These programs will remain on our YouTube channel indefinitely. Also, currently this playlist is private. Please do not share this link with anyone else. Finally, if you are a teacher, please put your name or email address in the comments at the start of each program so that we may provide a certificate of attendance for your professional development. And without further ado, I'm actually going to turn this over to Emily Jansen, who is with StoryCorp, and she's going to tell us a little bit about StoryCorp.
Joy, thank you so much. And thanks for welcoming StoryCorp to participate this week. It's really an honor for us. For the past 2 decades, StoryCorp has been providing everyday people like you, like me, the opportunity to sit down 2 by 2 to record our life experiences in our own words and to archive those stories at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. Over the course of this week, we'll be sharing some selections from our collection where we hear people tell their own stories against a backdrop of segregation and desegregation in America. Today, we'll hear from William Lynn Weaver. In 1964, he was 14 years old and starting his sophomore year of high school. He and 13 other Black students integrated the previously all-white West High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. At StoryCorp, he talked with his daughter about what happened on the first day of school and then who stepped up to support him when he came home weeks later with a failing report card. Let's watch.
As soon as we got into the school, the principal was calling the roll. He said, "Bill Weaver." And I said, "My name is William." And he said, "Oh, you're a smart N-word." I'd been in school maybe 30 minutes, and he suspended me. I don't remember a day that a teacher did not tell me that I didn't belong. We'd have a test, and they'd stand over me and then just snatch the paper out from me and say, "Time's up." The first report card, I got all Fs, including phys ed. So I've gone from being a good student to starting to think, well, maybe I don't belong. Maybe I am dumb. I was home one evening wondering what I'm going to do when there's a knock on the door. And it's my 7th grade science teacher from the Black school, Mr. Hill. He said, I understand that you're having some trouble. And I said, yeah, Mr. Hill, I think they're trying to run me away. And he said, what I need you to do is to come back to the junior high school after school every day and Saturday mornings. He said, can you do that? I said, yes, sir. And so every day, waiting for me would be Mr. Hill with assorted other teachers, the English teacher, the math teacher, and they tutored me. And once I got past those F's, I stopped doubting myself, but learning became almost a spiteful activity to prove the teachers at the high school wrong. And no matter what I did, academically or athletically, I was never recognized at that school. I never had a conversation with the counselor about going to college. But during my senior year, I got a letter saying you've been awarded a scholarship. So I ended up going to Howard University. And 37 years after I left high school, I met my older brother's funeral, talking to Mr. Hill. And I said, Mr. Hill, if I had not gotten that scholarship, I don't know what would have happened. And I don't know how I got the scholarship because I never even applied for it. And he said, I know, because I filled in the application and sent it off for you. So Mr. Hill stepped in and I believe saved my life. And at the time, I didn't realize how much I was being helped. And that's the ignorance of youth and the wisdom of age. When you look back on it, you say, how did I get here? How did I make it? Because people helped you, whether you knew it or not.
All right. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you to StoryCorp for that brief presentation. You will be hearing from StoryCorp all week with different presentations, different stories about experiences with desegregation. And so with that, I am actually pleased to introduce Mr. Mauro Morales, who is with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about what they do and who they are. So welcome, Mauro.
Thank you. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, first of all, I want to thank the National Archives and Records Administration, the National Park Service, and of course the Eisenhower Presidential Library, and in particular, Don Hammett and Joy Murphy for including the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights to participate in the Civil Rights Conference to commemorate the 70th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education and the Supreme Court decision. We've often worked with the Eisenhower Presidential Library in previous occasions because there's a direct tie between the work of President Eisenhower and the creation of USCCR, or the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. My name is Mauro Morales. I am the staff director of the commission, or also, as I mentioned, the USCCR, which I may use on occasion during my talk here to shorten its reference. I was appointed to this position by President Obama, and I've been serving as a staff director for over 9 years now. And it's been one of my life pleasures and honors to serve this agency for the past years. And on behalf of Chair Rochelle Garza and the other 7 commissioners, I'm happy to join you to discuss the work of the commission and the legacy. And my purpose here is to discuss the historical thread, quite frankly, of how the decision in Brown to desegregate the nation's schools led to the passage of the 1957 Civil Rights Act, and the creation of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Without the decision in Brown, there would have been no civil rights legislation and there would be no commission. And just to let everyone know, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is celebrating its 67th year of existence The commission, again, as I mentioned, was established when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the 1957 Civil Rights Act into law. As you know, and as you'll hear all week in conversations about Brown, the Supreme Court's 1954 ruling in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education brought the issue of school desegregation to the forefront of public attention. And unfortunately, as history has documented, Southern leaders began a campaign of massive resistance against desegregation. In the midst of this campaign, President Eisenhower proposed a civil rights bill designed to provide federal protection for African American voting rights. Unfortunately, as we know from history, most African Americans in the Southern United States have been disenfranchised by state and local Jim Crow laws. And in fact, in 1957, only about 20% of Black people were registered to vote. This was true despite the majority in numerous counties and congressional districts in the South. Most Black people had been effectively disenfranchised by voter registration rules and many laws in those southern states since the late 19th and early 20th century. Civil rights organizations had collected significant evidence of discriminatory practices, such as the administration of literacy and comprehensive tests and poll taxes. And while states had the right, and still do, to establish rules for voter registration elections, the federal government found an oversight role in ensuring that citizens could exercise the constitutional right to vote for federal officers, electors for the president and vice president, and for members of Congress. You have to recall that the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was the first federal civil rights legislation passed by the United States Congress since the Civil Rights Act of 1875 during Reconstruction after the Civil War. As I'd mentioned, it was passed by the 85th Congress and signed into law by President Dwight D. Eisenhower on September 9th, 1957. And although the Civil Rights Bill passed Congress, opponents of the act were successful in removing or weakening several of the provisions. And while these efforts limited the impact on African American voting right presentation that had to be rectified in the 64 Voting Rights Act and later Voting Rights Acts and other civil rights acts in the 60s, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 did establish the United States Commission on Civil Rights, of which I am the head, the staff director. And it also established the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. These two entities still exist and still do their job. You know, as I mentioned, Congress would later pass more effective civil rights laws in the form of Civil Rights Acts of 1960, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Nevertheless, this was the first effort, and it took enormous amount of political capital because of the resistance in the South and in senator and congressional leadership in the South at that time. I want to read a couple of quick little short statements. One was a statement made by President Eisenhower, so you could understand his involvement in doing as much as he could historically at that time. We all wish, obviously, more had been done, but you know, he did what he could, and for that we should acknowledge and commend him. First of all, he said, we must do something about the constitutional rights of the individual. To my mind, every American, whatever his religion, his color, his race, or anything else, should have exactly some concern for these matters, as does any individual who may have felt embarrassment or resentment because these rights have not been properly observed. So in his presidency, he was concerned. He was a man of his era, as we all know about him. He was from the Midwest, and also had been Supreme Allied Commander in World War II. But, you know, he had an awareness of what was going on in the country at the time. And one of the things he prepared when the act was introduced, President Eisenhower said in his State of the Union that he delivered to Congress on January 19th, 1957, he reemphasized that our nation has a lot of reasons to be gratified at the progress our people have made in mutual understanding. He reiterated that we're steadily moving closer to the goal of fair and equal treatment of all citizens without regard to race or color. The president observed, however, that unhappily, much remains to be done. And as a substantial step toward achieving this goal, he urged the passage of the administration's Civil Rights Bill. And as I mentioned earlier, two of the components of that was the creation of a bipartisan commission to investigate asserted violations of law in the field of civil rights, especially involving the right to vote, and to make recommendations to the president and Congress. That was the foundation and the creation of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He also emphasized the creation of a Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice in charge of a presidentially appointed Assistant Attorney General. And so one of the first things the U.S. Commission, after it was created, one of the very first things we did was a hearing on voting rights in the South. So in the course of the preliminary investigation of sworn complaints from Negro citizens, and I'm reading this from a document that was prepared by President Eisenhower and is in the presidential library, by the way, on the investigation of sworn complaints from Negro citizens in several Alabama counties alleging denials of their right to vote, local officials refused to permit the commission agents to see their records. Thereupon, a hearing was ordered commencing on December 8, 1959 in Montgomery, Alabama. And these hearings were held and they were televised. And as noted in the presidential library's records, millions of Americans gained their first understanding of the commission and the voting right problems being investigated as a result of extensive television and press coverage of the Montgomery hearing. That's critical. I mean, it's historical in what it did in launching our country and moving our country towards, impacting voting rights for African-American citizens, a fight that continues on to this day. And so starting with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, our U.S. Commission on Civil Rights reports have helped shape every federal civil rights law enacted during our existence. And while each federal agency now has a civil rights office, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is the only independent federal entity charged with studying and reporting on rights issues across the government. U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has influenced legislation that has achieved greater equality for every segment of American society, particularly marginalized communities. We inform all branches of government in seeking to develop well-reasoned solutions to a myriad of civil rights challenges confronting our nation. In addition to our national federal perspective, we have a network of 51, now actually 56, state advisory committees and territory committees that offer a broad perspective of concerns at the state and local level, and they recommend actions to address them. Former chair of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Catherine Lehman, stated, "Our first report, issued in 1959, stated that the gap between the great American promise of equal opportunity and equal justice under law and the startlingly inadequate fulfillment in practice has been a basic fact of American history. Then and now, when we entered our 7th decade as a commission, we strive to close that gap, guiding the ongoing national movement to ensure full civil rights protections." The mission of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is to inform the development of national civil rights policy and enhance the enforcement of federal civil rights laws. The Commission pursues this mission by investigating alleged deprivations of voting rights, alleged allegations of discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, national origin, or in the administration of justice. The Commission also serves as a monitor of effective enforcement of civil rights laws by the federal government. The Commission does this and is committed to doing quality research that leads to findings and policy recommendations that inform the President, Congress, and the public on important civil rights issues. Give you a little bit more background about the Commission. The Commission is an independent federal agency. It is composed of 8 commissioners, 4 appointed by Congress, 4 appointed by the President. It's bipartisan, and their responsibilities include studying and collecting information relating to discrimination or denials of equal protection of laws. The Commission serves as a national clearinghouse of information regarding civil rights and preparing public announcements and advertising campaigns to discourage discrimination or denials of equal protection. The staff director, who I am, of course, is appointed by the President with the concurrence of a majority of commissioners, and I am the agency head of the Commission. The Commission is composed of numerous departments. We have the Office of the Staff Director, of which I am the head. That office has sub-offices, which are the offices of Public Affairs, Communications, and Outreach. We have oversight of congressional affairs and outreach to members of Congress and Senate. And most recently, about 3 years ago, Congress created a new commission, a subcommission, of which we have administrative responsibility. It is called the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. It's a separate entity from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Nevertheless, we have, again, administrative authority and oversight of it, and it functions as its own commission with its own set of commissioners. In addition, we have an Office of General Counsel who provides legal opinions and advice when our agency is functioning. We have an Office of Civil Rights Evaluation. That office is critical to the operation of USCCR. They do the investigations, they create the reports, and they undertake the briefings, and they do the outreach to experts and the testimony that is used to inform our reports and are used in a very rigorous academic and substantive manner on the topics that we research. We also have a regional programs unit. They're the ones that have the responsibility to manage and create the state advisory committees. Each state has a state advisory committee comprised of volunteers within that state who then meet and also pick a topic to investigate and provide the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights a report on the topics that they investigate. And oftentimes we use those reports, we being the headquarters or then the federal office, the national office, we use those reports to as a foundation to study issues. We've used those reports to inform reports that the commissioners create or take on and undertake for the commission. So, for example, when things were happening in the country in regards to community policing, several state advisory committees issued reports and sent them on to us, which we then did a report in the nation on community policing. Same thing on police use of force. Several state advisory committees did investigations in their own states on what was happening in police departments in their states. And we later on used that information for a report that we issued on police use of force. Voting rights. We've often received reports from states on voting rights, and we created a very substantial and substantive report on voting rights in our nation about 5 years ago, which looked at the Supreme Court decision in the Holder case and how was that impacting voting rights currently in the states, many of them in the southern states as well. And so all these reports are available on our website, www.usccr.gov. I encourage you to go to our website and I encourage you to look at these reports. These reports have been used by Congress and the president, again, on important matters of legislation. Our voting rights report, currently, many of those aspects and recommendations are in the John Lewis voting rights bill. We did another report a few years ago on subminimum wage and the impact it was having on disability communities. And Congress utilized those findings and recommendations in legislation that's in Congress. And we also did one most recently about 2 years ago on maternal health impacts in communities of color. And Congress is looking at that as well and has included that in several pieces of legislation. So the legacy and the work of the commission continues on, even though it was formed as a voting rights, as a commission to look at voting rights in the South. We've expanded on that and we've continued that legacy. We do look at voting rights quite a bit, but it's not the only thing we investigate in terms of civil rights in our country. And so very proud of that. And lastly, the last department we have is administrative services. They handle our human resources, our budget and finance, and our contracting. We have over 65 federal employees and a budget that's approximately $15 million that we are provided by Congress annually. And we do our best to make sure we protect and carry out the mandates of Congress. In fiscal year 2023, the commission held a briefing to assess the federal government's response to anti-Asian racism in the United States. At this public briefing, commissioners heard from subject matter experts, such as government officials, academics, policy experts, law enforcement professionals, advocates, and impacted persons. The commission published a report, and it's our statutory enforcement report. So under Congress's mandate, we are required to produce one statutory enforcement report every year. And in 2023, our statutory enforcement report was the federal response to anti-Asian racism in the United States. We examined the federal government's role in documenting, prosecuting, and preventing hate crimes against persons of Asian American descent during COVID. And we also look at contemporary civil rights challenges. The other report we did in 2023 was looking at civil rights challenges, and I'll get into that in a moment. In FY 2023, the federal government and our agency runs on what's called the fiscal year, which runs from the last day in September to the first day in October. So in fiscal year 2023, our advisor, just to give you an idea of the work we do, our advisory committees issued 17 reports and memoranda, conducted 66 fact-finding events, and held 302 planning meetings. Through their fact-finding events and reports, the advisory committees covered a broad range of civil rights issues. Both commission reports this year that we did relied on testimony, findings, and recommendations from advisory committees. And I'll tell you, we also added Congress about 3 years ago, added territories to the United States. And so we have Puerto Rico became a state advisory committee, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the American Virgin Islands. So these are all territories that the United States oversees, and they are now part of state advisory committees that we utilize and that work with us in terms of providing the commission important information. And I'll say that this year in 2024, we're going to release 3 reports. And we're really looking forward to that. We should do that in the next few months, and certainly before the end of the calendar year. The first is about racial disparities and violent crime victimization in the United States. This report's about racial and ethnic disparities in violent crime victimization in the United States. The Commission's investigation sought to examine the federal government's role in collecting data and addressing racial disparities in violent victimization as an important dimension of the fair administration of justice. Again, this report was, we had a briefing on it. We did a lot of investigation, and the commissioners will be voting on it in about 2 weeks, and we should release it before the end of the fiscal year. So we're looking forward to that. Again, I would encourage you to go to our website, www.usccr.gov, in order to see the depth of reports that we've done, that we're doing this year, we did last year, and have over the past 67 years. We have archives of our reports. So students and academics turn to our reports for a variety of academic and historical information in the work we do. The second report that we're releasing this year is the civil rights implications of the federal use of facial recognition technology. This report is focused on the civil rights implications of facial recognition technology. This investigation will analyze how FRT, as they say for short, is developed, how it's being utilized by federal agencies, emerging civil rights concerns, and safeguards the federal government is implementing to mitigate potential civil rights issues. This is a cutting edge report and a study, and everybody's really excited about this because AI, as we now know, is everywhere. It's becoming a part of our lives in ways we never even contemplated. For those of you that go to the airport or been to the airport, there's facial technology now that recognizes you when you go in to check in for your flight. There's facial recognition in law enforcement being used around the world and also in some areas of the United States. And how is that being correctly applied so that there's not misidentification and people who are innocent are being picked up because the technology can't differentiate between color of their skin or other facial hair features and whatnot. And while it can serve an important component of our for our community and our safety, we want to make sure it's done properly. And some of the technology, as we know, the frontier in AI is so far out there, the laws haven't quite caught up to it. And we're just looking at facial recognition. There are a lot of other components of artificial intelligence that are impacting all of us as a country. And we may look at some other topics in the near future in the coming years. But the first one we decided to take on was facial recognition. We went to some AI companies that are doing innovative algorithms. We worked with law enforcement and sought information as to what's really going on. So I would also encourage you to look at that report as it come out. That should come out probably sometime in early or mid-October. So we're excited about that. And lastly, another report that will hopefully get out before the end of the calendar year, so there could be as many as 3 reports in 2024, will be on whether prisoners' religious freedom rights are being protected and enforced in accordance with the Constitution and statutory provisions. It's an updated report that we did back in 2008 called Enforcing Religious Freedom in Prison. So again, it should be an interesting and a cutting edge report. I'm really excited about the work we do. Folks, sometimes, we've, again, been in existence for 67 years. I believe we're truly a jewel in the federal government in terms of the work we do. We're quiet, but I think we're mighty because of the depth and substantive research that's done by our Office of Civil Rights Evaluation. Most of the people that are in there are PhDs, social scientists, who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get in there and do the hard academic work and research. A lot of the information we get during our briefings are informed by witnesses that come forward to testify to the commission. We usually have the briefings we hold usually will last all day. We usually have 4 panels and anywhere up to 25 to 28 witnesses during the course of the day. It's a long day, but it's usually a panel of academic experts, a panel of government officials. Another panel will be of policymakers or practitioners. And then usually we have a component where the public can come in and speak about how they're impacted. And a lot of times the information that we get from the public, and we always try to make it available for the public to come testify to us because 1, they're the US taxpayers, and 2, we want folks to know that their government is out there working for them and engaged and interested in them and the information they have. And so we're very proud of that. The staff is a tremendous staff that works at USCCR. I am so lucky that I get to work with these people. Many of them have worked at the commission for 30 years. We have a group of folks that have been there from quite a long time. And so I've been very fortunate in what I've been able to do as a staff director. Again, I've served 9 years. I've had now worked over 3.5 presidential administrations, 4 chairs. I have the new one, Chairwoman Rochelle Garza, who was appointed last year by President Obama. As I mentioned, four of the commissioners are appointed by the president, 4 appointed by Congress. It's bipartisan, kind of depends on who's the president at the time, but at any given time, we have anywhere from 6 to 4 and 4 political parties. Right now, we have 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, and they're working together to find common ground on a lot of civil rights issues that face our country. And it's an exciting time. We're about to enter a presidential election, which could change the makeup of the commission, but it's also a part of our democratic and political process. And again, the state advisory committees, I can't say enough about the work they do. People volunteer to do that. We have an application process. It's on our website. So if any of you would like to volunteer, I know the Presidential Library is in the state of Kansas. My wife is from Kansas. I've married into it. I'm Kansian now by marriage, and actually we have a home in Kansas City, and I really enjoy being in the state of Kansas and get out to the Presidential Library as often as I can. And Joy and Donna have been incredible hosts to me and to the commission over these years, and we continue to look forward to working with them. And really, I just would applaud you on the work in the conference on Brown. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education. I'm a lawyer by training, and we studied this in law school, of course. But the depth and the breadth of what it has meant for our country is significant and impactful. Out of it, as I said in the beginning of my conversation, was born the 1957 Civil Rights Act, and then the commission. And again, we're 67 years old. I have every expectation and believe it'll go on for another 67 or 70 years. We'll be celebrating 70 years in 3 years, and so that should be exciting. We had a great event when we celebrated our 60th anniversary. We did it over at the Library of Congress, and we had a lot of the original documents that created our commission, including some of these presidential documents that I just read from the Eisenhower Library. And so we had former chairs come, we had senators and Congress members speak about the importance of the commission. So I'm excited, looking forward to the future here. And so I don't know if there's anything else you might have for me, Joy, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can, if I can. But I really do appreciate the time you all have shared with me.
Right. Thank you so much, Mauro. To anyone who is watching us virtually, if you have questions for Mauro, you can type them in the chat and I will ask them. I know we have people live at President Clinton's library. If any of them have questions, you are welcome to ask those questions as well. In the meantime, I do have a question. You talked about how Congress uses your report. I think what I want to know is, do other governmental agents, like a city, state, local government, nonprofits, activist organizations, do they use your reports as well, and how have they been used?
Joy, that's a great question, and the answer is yes. Our reports are often used in academic research because of the rigorous process that we apply to this. Nothing that's in our reports is documented as a fact. It's either from another report or something that we have gathered directly. So there's no conspiracy theories in our reports whatsoever, but it's used by academics. It's used by policymakers, again, in state government. Oftentimes we've discussed how states can do a better job of reporting like hate crimes, for example. Oftentimes, local police departments, one of the things we found in our anti-Asian hate crime report was that local police departments were not classifying some of these crimes as hate crimes. They were just classifying them as simple assaults or other type of crimes. And so they were getting underreported. So one of the recommendations that's in a lot of states' legislation is to mandate, police departments to report certain crimes as hate crimes, so that there is a level of understanding of what's really going on out there. And then finally, organizations will often use and advocate some of the findings that we've created. And they'll talk about how, for example, in maternal health, how healthcare in some aspects in some communities is failing, and women's health and maternal are being jeopardized. We're the most advanced, one of the most advanced countries in the world, yet we have some of the worst health outcomes for women of color, to the point where we're like in some third world countries, and that should not be the case. And so there's reasons for that. We looked at that. Some has to do with money, some has to do with policy, some has to do with insurance, and so on. But these are issues that don't necessarily need to be resolved at the federal government level, but local government as well.
Okay, good. So one of the questions I want to ask you, of course, our ongoing theme for this conference is what are civil rights? So we'll be asking people tomorrow, someone from the ACLU will be coming in to talk about what are civil rights. And so we're asking people, what from the USCCR's perspective, what are civil rights?
That's a good question. I'm almost feel like I'm stumped. But I think the simple answer is civil rights is essentially the ability for you as an individual to enjoy your freedoms. If there's an obstacle preventing you from enjoying what the Constitution gives you. So, for example, voting rights. If you're not allowed to, if you're qualified to vote and you're not being allowed to vote, there's some obstacle, or somebody's intentionally doing something. And it could be something as sinister as it was back in the 50s, poll tax or literacy test, or, outright, moving, people's addresses, or preventing them. Or it could be something that's, less, requiring maybe an ID from a community that maybe doesn't normally have IDs, or moving and closing polling places, and making them, instead of expanding polling where people can vote, closing them, so that now you have long lines of people trying to vote on election day, as opposed to making it easier. So civil rights is your ability to enjoy your life and the freedoms that you've been given under the Constitution and through our country. And that's what makes our country great. And if we don't fight for those rights and we don't protect for those rights, they can go away. We have to be careful. There's a lot of rhetoric right now about, some of the challenges our country's facing. And we should take those serious, and you should think about them, and you should investigate, the truth. I mean, don't believe what's on TikTok necessarily, but you can investigate. Go to our reports. Our report on voting rights will open your eyes about how that's been taken away. I'll give you another example on voting rights, real simple. Native Americans. You think, well, yeah, of course, they're first Americans. They, were here before anybody came to our country, right? Well, it's interesting how in some states, because they live on reservations, many of them live on reservations, and they're large distances in certain areas of the country, they would maintain only one polling place, or they would limit the time of the polling place. And that's terrible, and that should not be the case. People shouldn't have to fly on an airplane to vote. You should be able to vote by ballot if that's the case. And we can make accommodations and securities protect those votes. And so that's another example of something we pointed out that was brought to our attention by Native American organizations and tribes, how they can't vote. And oftentimes too, it's a language, barrier as well. So those are real examples of how our lives are impacted by civil rights.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat. I don't know if there are any questions at Clinton. If not, then I will ask.
We've got a question. Sorry. This is Brian.
I hear you, Brian. Go ahead.
Yeah. So is the USCCR the body that defines what a hate crime is? Or is that something that is defined by Congress? Who kind of puts the language together so we know when we hear the word hate crime that there is a specific definition to that phrase?
Well, that's a great question. Very sophisticated question, by the way, whoever asked that. There's no simple answer. It could be a moving, component. Hate comes in so many, many ways. It could be directed at, their gender, directed at someone's religion. It could be, who they, what they look like. And so we don't, it's not our job necessarily, commission's job to give definitive answers. It's the commission's job to point out these discrepancies, these challenges, so that the correct political and legislative bodies can address these. It's their job to determine, what a hate crime is. There's a code of federal regulations, and there's statutes that determine that. Of course, crimes are oftentimes determined at the state level as well. But by providing a clear understanding of what is entailed in defining what a hate crime is. And it may be something different from one community to another, so, it's not necessarily that one size fits all. And so that's one of the things that we oftentimes, and then why we do a broad outreach to other communities so that they can determine, what the civil rights impact of something happening in their community or their state, and how they should address it and what makes sense in their own communities. So I don't know if that answers your question completely, but, there are oftentimes, it's like, what's a civil right? You could ask 10 people and you might get 10 different answers. And, what's a hate crime? Well, to somebody who's walking down the street and somebody yells at you and says, and this has happened to me, hey, go back where you came from. And I was like shocked that somebody yelled that at me, and I was like, well, first of all, I was born here. My father, was a Korean veteran. I had an uncle that fought with Patton's Third Armies and raced across Europe and fought for our country. And I've been to the Civil War battlefields, and I've been to World War II battlefields in Europe. And so when folks say that, it hurts and it cuts to the core and it makes you angry. But there are better ways to respond than with violence. And so we have to, make sure that if somebody does harm you, that you have an ability to address that.
We've got another question, Joey, if we can ask. Can you hear it? Can you hear me, Joey?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Barely.
Hi, how about now? A lot better?
Yes, much better.
Hi, my name is Charles Smith. I work for Little Rock School District. I also volunteer, a religious volunteer in prison system here in Arkansas, in Little Rock. And you mentioned about one of your reports specifically addresses that felons or inmates or ex-inmates are treated fairly. Was that correct?
Yes.
Hello? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a specific report I can look at that addresses that?
Well, that's another great question. I really love these questions. We're issuing a report. That report will come out in probably about 2 or 3 months. Go to our website. We had a briefing. You can actually go to our website and you can see the testimony that was submitted by witnesses. We had, I believe, 20 witnesses that day, about a month ago, maybe it was 6 weeks ago, on religious freedom in prison and how, it's been impacted in certain situations, how people abuse it, how people deny it, so on and so on. And so I would encourage you to go there. In our report on voting rights that we issued about 5 years ago, one of the recommendations and one of the issues we looked at was, returning felons. Once somebody served their time to society, many people we found were still being denied the right to vote, even though their sentence was over, they'd, paid their fines or whatever it was. They were still being denied the right to vote, and that was, incredible that was still continuing. So yes, prisoners have certain rights and under the Constitution, and we are obligated to follow them again, regardless of their situation. And as you said, many of them, are in prison, but some, when they get out, should have their rights restored to function in society, because without doing that, they're not going to have an equal chance to integrate and become a contributing member of society. So that's a really good question. I could do this all day. I know we can't, Joy, but I just want to say, the Clinton Library and the Eisenhower Library. I've been to the Nixon Library. I've been to the Truman Library. These libraries are such valuable, academic and scholarly research on what these presidents have done for our country. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I didn't know much about Eisenhower and the depth of what he accomplished as a president for our nation. Regardless of what your political, your partisan, or your party beliefs are, I mean, he created the federal highway system and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and it's just tremendous stuff. And so when you learn these things, and they're facts, you can't be swayed by conspiracy theories.
Any other questions, Brian?
Well, looks like we have another one.
Oh, that's Brian.
Oh, that's Brian.
I do have one more that might be a little kind of off, but so I work for the National Park Service, and we read a lot in our agency about climate change being now a civil right, and how that affects people disproportionately across this country. Can you address that?
That's we have not yet, and that's a really good. It would be one of the topics that I would encourage commissioners to investigate, encourage commissioners to We did look at something called environmental justice about 7 years ago. There was again, you could look at our website and find these reports. They're all there. And the briefings that were used to inform those reports are also there, and the witnesses. We did do a report on something called environmental justice. So what we did was we looked at a community in Alabama that had a processing plant, and it was sited in this community. And of course, it was predominantly African American community, and the health aspects of it and its impact on the value of their homes, their property. It drove jobs and businesses away, and the healthcare impacts were astounding. And how, in the pursuit of profit for these corporations, people's rights are being trampled on and ignored, and having to sue them in multi-million-dollar lawsuits in these environmental cases. And oftentimes these corporations just declare bankruptcy and just abandon these sites. And it's just been terrible. But climate change is another really good cutting edge. Now, as you can imagine, there are a lot of political machinations about it. There's some people that claim that, there is no such thing. So I think getting commissioners together to investigate that, because the way the reports come about is the commissioners often negotiate and work with each other on determining what the topic will be for the coming year. We're actually going through that process right now for reports for 2025. So they have to, they vote on them, and you have to have a majority of 5 in order to get a topic adopted. But I'm gonna, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I'm gonna propose, that the commission looks at in 2025 climate change and how that's impacting communities of color. That's a great idea.
Any other questions?
I think that's all from us.
Okay. Well, Mara, I do want to go back to just something that you said really quick, and that was the idea about like environmental justice and environmental civil rights, because we think about like in Jackson, Mississippi, where they didn't have clean water for quite a while. I'm not even sure if they have it yet, and this was just in the past year. And of course, we all know about the Flint water crisis. And I don't know that people think about that, or at least I haven't really thought about that as a civil rights issue, but environmental justice is civil rights. So something else to think about.
I couldn't agree with you more. I should have probably said at the beginning, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is not an enforcement agency. The Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights, as we saw from the 1957 legislation, is the enforcement arm of the federal government for civil rights violations. And they have enforced in many different ways against schools, against individuals, disabilities, so on and so on. But having said that, we, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, shines a light on these issues that are later then reviewed and examined and become, important components of not only legislation, but potentially lawsuits. Many of our reports have also been used in litigation to show that there was a problem that people ignored, and there were consequences and people got hurt by it. So, even though we're not an enforcement agency, we work with the Department of Justice and many other federal agencies, for that matter, on issues affecting the American people.
One final question before we say bye to you, Morrow. You said your reports are on your website. Does that go all the way back to the beginning of the USCCR, or are they archived somewhere else, the older reports?
Great, another great question. So we have a certain set, probably going back to about, I want to say 4 years on our, but within our website, if you go to our website, you'll see a little thing that says archive, and it goes right to the archive. They are archived at the Thurgood Marshall Library in University of Maryland. And so you can get them there. You can get old transcripts. It doesn't happen very often, but once in a while I'll get an inquiry as to a very obscure report or reference in an email that we made, in 1960 or 1962, and that can kind of stump us. But we rely on, archives, the National Archives, for a lot of that, and they work with us, and we've run down some obscure documents and some obscure material. But again, most of it's all there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. We have a great staff. Angelia Rorson's our head of communications and public outreach. She's on our website if you have questions about where a document is. We've engaged in a drill because someone said, "Oh, I want to find this document," and Angela looked for it, and I'll look for it, and other people will look for it. Eventually, we find it. So we'll be advocates and running down information if anybody would like some.
All right. Okay, well, I want to say thank you, Morrow, and thank you to everyone who is watching. Up next, we will welcome Dr. Sean Alexander. At 5 o'clock, we will start on time, right at 5 o'clock. We will be ending this stream and moving to the one with Dr. Alexander. So make sure that you go out of this one and click on the one for Dr. Alexander. But for now, we get about a 20-minute break before we start our next program. Like I said, we'll start right on time. Thank you again, Morrow. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.